There's been a lot of talk and debate around the topic of diversity and inclusion. And regardless of what side you are on, in today's episode, we're going to talk about the issues pertaining to tech, as well as how to navigate conversations with your teammates and peers. So stay tuned. Welcome to Build, brought to you by Pivotal Tracker. I'm your host, Purnima Vijay Shankar. In each episode of Build, innovators and I debunk a number of myths and misconceptions related to building products, companies, and your career in tech. Now, as you can imagine, there are a lot of myths and misconceptions around diversity and inclusion. Conversations can be really hard to navigate. And that's why in today's episode, we're going to talk about the issues that pertain specifically to tech and help you navigate those conversations with teammates and peers. And if you're curious about starting a diversity and inclusion initiative at your company or participating in another organization, then stick around for the next episode where we'll do a deeper dive into those practices. In today's episode, I've invited Melinda Epler and Wayne Sutton, who are the founders of Change Catalyst and Tech Inclusion. Thanks, you guys, for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So let's start by talking about what exactly is diversity and inclusion.
I like to say that diversity is about bringing diverse people to the table, and inclusion is about inviting them to speak, encouraging them to lead, and supporting them in leadership. Mm-hmm. So there's diversity is really about the demographics, and inclusion is about how people show up, how people thrive, and how people feel that they belong in their culture.
Yeah, and how do you think it pertains to tech?
I like to say diversity includes in everything, how it pertains to tech. Tech impacts the world, it impacts everything we do in our daily lives, from the time we wake up to the time we go to sleep. Tech creates wealth, tech creates innovation. You look at all the products, look at some of the products building in the show, and then we think about the customers, we think about the founders, we think about the equity or the inequity, or the opportunities that is connected to tech. Mm-hmm. And without diversity, right? You see products being built by a homogeneous culture. You see solutions not brought to the table because it's being built by one or two mindsets. You see a lot of disparity gaps in terms of access and wealth. Mm-hmm. So without diversity, really the tech industry is not as thriving as it should be or it could be. Mm-hmm. And the impact it's having in a positive and a negative way is not where it could be as a whole as well. At the same time, if the tech industry was more inclusive, we would look at, I can imagine more innovative products. Mm-hmm. I can imagine an industry that is really identifying or being held accountable to its actions and its current culture, mm-hmm. where we wouldn't have issues that existed in the 60s, 70s in terms of not having equal pay, not having women and other represented groups, African Americans in leadership positions, culture, sexual harassment. Right. If we had inclusion, these negative issues that is in the face of our society right now in tech wouldn't exist.
So let's talk about what drew you to focus on diversity and inclusion, because you both had different backgrounds before you were working on this.
Yeah. My background started back in cultural anthropology and really looking at how individuals create change in societies, how culture changes. Mm-hmm. And then I moved into documentary filmmaking, and I was a documentary filmmaker for about 10 years, became a consultant, and then actually became an executive at an engineering firm. And that's really that experience of being a woman, and the only woman in leadership in that engineering firm, was what made me rethink what needs to change in society.
Yeah.
I was not thriving
Sure.
as in that culture, and it was because it wasn't set up for me. It wasn't set up for my success, and so I actually left that job as an executive to go into diversity and inclusion and start Change Catalyst and the tech inclusion programs, really addressing the inequities in our society. And my whole life has been focused on creating social and environmental change. And I believe now that if we don't change leadership, if we don't change who can be a leader and who is leading our countries, who's leading our companies, who's leading our technologies, our stories, then we can't change what's really happening in the world. So I am here because I believe that this is the most important thing for me to be working on to create positive social change in the world.
And what about yourself, Wayne? Your background is also from a different angle.
Yeah. I started off doing design, graphic design, showing my age some, and then got into design, UI, UX, and computer graphic design. Did IT for about 8 years in North Carolina, Research Triangle Park. Then became a tech founder. Had a startup and back in 2007 or 8, and didn't realize that in North Carolina that I was one of very few unrepresented tech founders, a black tech founder. And then experienced the challenges of growing and scaling a company. And then fast forward to 2011, the data from CB Insights said that 1% of tech startups that raise angel or VC are founded by African American Latinos. And they actually grouped that data together. So it really was less than 1% black and Latino that received any angel venture capital in 2011. And by that time, I knew various colleagues across the country that was also working on startups, and I always been someone if there's a problem, what can we create a solution around? And so some other colleagues and we decided to move to Mountain View and create the very first incubator and accelerator focused on underrepresented tech founders. And that led to a whole nother window of opportunities, moved to Silicon Valley, then moved to San Francisco, and then went through a period where after that, I realized that the tech industry did not want to talk about diversity and inclusion, did not want to talk about the disparities of access and inequality for founders to receive capital. The tech industry was priding itself on being a meritocracy.
Right.
And it was like, anyone can create a tech company, anyone can create a product, doesn't matter. That may be true.
But it wasn't happening.
No, it was not happening.
Yeah.
And in the end, the data already showed that everyone was not raising angel capital. It wasn't because of lack of talent. It was not because the products was not as good. It was because what the VC industry was calling pattern matching.
Right.
And so I went through a period where I was not talking about diversity and inclusion at all. We're not talking about lack of funding for underrepresented entrepreneurs. And then the tech industry released their diversity numbers in 2014. And then the email, I won't say the phone, but more like the email and the Twitter DM started come in was like, hey, we need to talk about diversity. I remember you used to talk about back in the day. And then Melinda and I started collaborating on solutions. And we got invited to so many roundtables, kind of private conversations, one-on-one meetings around what can we do to fix this diversity problem.
Yeah, those were from the White House to the Small Business Administration to the FEC, the FCC. And then local tech companies and local conversations as well, all kind of talking about this.
And that was the White House under the Obama administration.
Yes, so we're clear.
Yes, of course. Well, we know who was in the administration in 2014.
Yes, yeah.
So what were the problems? You already touched upon some of them in your intro. What were some of the problems specific to tech that you continue to see in this phase and maybe even today?
Yeah, I would say the biggest problem is still that happened then that we see today is still this set of denial that there is an issue. There's also the problem that it's going to be one technology solution or you do one thing that's going to fix everything. Right. And then it's not
one cheap thing.
Yeah. And then one problem is still thinking that companies and individuals can focus on one demographic or one category.
Right.
I would say category, but one part of the conversation and use it saying that it's solving all their problems.
Sure.
And I would probably say lastly, there's another problem in that shock. There was how many companies, when they started talking about want to do work around solutions around diversity and inclusion, they were not even connected to their business or their customers or their direct culture. They were just trying to say, hey, we're working on this, get off our backs, and here's our solution, and it's hard. And that all those things combined is not really good for the goal we want to achieve.
Yeah. I think there's a few different reasons that this is happening. This happened in tech differently than in other industries. It started back in when Steve Jobs and some of the big great tech CEOs became the story around tech, and the story revolved around that being the kind of that is the tech founder, is that white male CEO is the tech founder. And when those white male tech founders built their companies, they hired their friends.
Right.
And, they just didn't think about it. They hired their friends, and their friends hired their friends, and the tech companies are still set up for referrals mostly. And when you have the same people referring their friends, then you're going to have a homogenous culture.
Right.
And so the issue is, now that those companies are so big, it's really hard to create change in them.
Yeah.
That brings up another good point because the industry is really, is manipulated by market trends and success patterns, right? So the VCs, why they hadn't fund unrepresented founders, because they said, well, they hadn't seen any, or there hadn't been enough for them to say this is a good model, right? But in the culture of the tech industry, you look at you had your Microsofts, your Intels, your HPs. That was like one era of American business and society, how they grew and scaled their companies. Then the second level or second wave is the Googles, the Facebooks, the Twitter, the Snaps, the Instagrams, the Salesforce. Those companies basically, like Melinda said, they hired their friends when they started. Right, Larry and Sergey was, the Stanford grad, and then they got funding from the Ron Conway and the network. It was a lot of luck involved, a lot of sweat, a lot of hard work. They built innovative products, but then because those companies made a lot of money, everybody was like replicated that same pattern.
Right.
And I'm old enough to remember where it didn't matter what school we went to. You can code, you can build, you can design. It didn't matter. Let's get to work. Let's build something. But then because it became a new norm of like, let's copy Google, let's copy Facebook, let's copy other companies. And that became the standard, like, we must do this. And if we look at the demographic data.
Yeah. So obviously this isn't the first time that people are having this conversation. And like I mentioned in the intro, there have been many, many years that we've been having this. I know even for myself moving out here in 2004, there were some rumblings, but not a whole lot to the level it's at today. But obviously people have tried to fix this problem once before, and where have they fallen short? Like, what didn't work?
Part of it is not measuring, and that changed in 2014. So that was a big shift for everyone, where they really could see, these are the diversity, these are the actual demographics of our companies. Oh, whoa, those are really bad.
Right.
We need to figure out how to solve them. And then once they said that, they kind of put those numbers out there. It hasn't changed all that much because the first year it was just about measuring, and then starting to hire diversity and inclusion managers and directors, but not putting a lot of money and resources into really, you can't hire one person to change a whole company. You get that with very little resources.
Right.
That's just not possible. So as those diversity and inclusion managers have gained traction in their own companies, they're starting to get bigger budgets, and things are starting to change a little bit faster in the companies. Now, that does not discount the fact that people have been working on diversity and inclusion in some of the tech companies for quite some time. And one of the issues is that many of the initiatives around diversity and inclusion in the past have focused on employee resource groups, affinity groups, and really helping support underrepresented people in the companies. And I think on the other hand, some work has been done on education and awareness building. And this happens in every kind of major culture shift. It happened in the sustainability movement as well, that there's an expectation that if you tell somebody there's something wrong, they'll do something about it. But the problem is you actually have to help them change their behaviors and really fundamentally think about how to shift culture, how to shift processes and systems that are ingrained and perpetuating the problem.
Yeah, talk is cheap.
Yeah, talk is yeah, and it doesn't really change anything. And the third component, so there's the The third component is really about shaming. There's also a really deep and disturbing trend around shaming people into changing. That doesn't really change people either.
Yeah.
So there's a new, I think, a new and growing movement and at least an understanding, I wouldn't say movement yet, but an understanding that it takes more. It takes a bigger effort to really look at your culture. How do you change your culture? How do you change individual behavior? How do you fundamentally look at your recruiting process and say, oh, wow, from the very beginning, we need to change the way we're doing things. There are biases in that system, but also there are some mismatched systemic problems in the process.
Yeah. So let's talk about change catalyst and how do you approach this differently?
So we have a few different things that we do. So we have events. We have our tech inclusion events, and when we were talking earlier about having those roundtable discussions back in 2014, we started getting pretty frustrated that those roundtable discussions kept talking about the same things over and over. We had the same conversations over and over again, and they were really problems focused. Which is important.
What's an example of that?
An example would be the question we get asked over and over again. Well, who's doing it well?
Oh,
right? And
sure.
And the reason why everybody wanted
like
to know,
they're a benchmark.
No, not that. The reason everybody want to know everybody want to know what company was having any type of success around diversity and inclusion, any type of success.
Oh, to see if it was even worth it.
We want to know, was it worth it, but also want to know, could they copy it when they replicated it, and that was really it, because everybody wanted one moonshot idea to say we're implementing change that they can say, well, get up, we're working on it. And that was a repetitive question across the board. And at that time, really, there wasn't no company that had all the answers and all the ideas, or
guys all suck. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or just it's not making an impact.
Yeah.
I'd say it's still the case. There's no one company that's doing everything right. I think
agree.
because the diversity and inclusion programs are under-resourced, but there are gems. There are some people that are doing some really great programs that we can point to. I think also in 2014, there was a lot of just talk amongst underrepresented people about feeling disenfranchised, feeling like their opportunities weren't there for them, and hearing over and over again that there are barriers, but less about solutions. Like, how do we break down those barriers? What do we do? How do we solve that problem? So that was one is we really wanted to focus on solutions, and that's what we've done. We've designed it to focus on solutions. The second is we really, with our tech inclusion programs, it's a systemic problem across the tech industry. So it starts in education. And then there's a huge problem in terms of entrepreneurship and lack of investing, lack of investors who are underrepresented, and then also a lack of investing in underrepresented founders. And then, of course, the workplace. And at the time was really focused on recruiting. And as we talked about, you also have to change the culture. You can't just change recruiting because you're bringing underrepresented people into a culture that's not created for them, and they're going to leave. Like, I left my position, so workplace and then policymakers as well, policy and government agencies, and their power and wealth, ability to create change in the system. And now we also focus on storytelling, like you do as well, to really help raise the underrepresented voices and perspectives and have more diverse perspectives out there. So for our events, that's what we focus across the tech ecosystem, bring everybody together to focus on solution. For our consulting, training, and toolkits, we're also solutions focused and focused on behavior and culture change, and really going beyond recruiting. Recruiting is a part of that, but all the way through creating a culture of belonging.
And I'll add that for us is that how Change Council is different is that we're not come in and look at one problem or one sector of the goal that you want to accomplish around diversity and inclusion. We want to really discover and look at your entire company from a culture and a systematic perspective to help identify opportunities to create real change. What we've seen in the past is that a lot of companies contact us after taking unconscious bias training and saying, we did that, now what? What do we do now? That has some impact, has some effectiveness, but we need more. And what's been the opportunity and the challenge aspect, though, is that smaller companies, even larger companies, they really have to be committed to put the resources in to explore what real change looks like.
Right.
Whether you implement a new tool to remove names from resumes, that's just one thing.
Yeah.
That's just one task you can do to help affect your recruitment process. But what about when you have your product team, your design team, your engineering team, and there's different negative and positive behaviors in that one team dynamic? A software tool is not necessarily going to fix that. A one unconscious bias training is not going to fix that. There needs to be a discovery and a real heart-to-heart conversation around employee behavior with accountability.
Right.
And if we come in and have those harder conversations, put together a report, talk with the executive team, and then if they have a head of diversity officer, work with that individual to put together some strategies where they can create change.
Nice.
Yeah.
So what's some impact that you've seen so far through your programs and your offerings?
Yeah, we've seen impact across the board. There's impact from the consultant has been from a company not having a strategy at all, from everybody saying well, we care about this, we want to do something, to now that there's a board level, executive level type solution with a plan in place that they can measure and track results over time with some accountability involved, whether it's an individual or a team, saying that this is a team that is working on creating inclusive culture. That's been some of our training and consulting impact. The other impact we've seen around our conferences and events that we've done now across the globe, we've been overseas, across the globe, has been everything from gender neutral bathrooms to different new jobs created.
Yeah, that's a great actually segue into my next question. Is I know a lot of people, especially in our audience, care deeply about diversity and inclusion, but they may find it hard to navigate those conversations or to even initiate them with their teams, with their bosses. So how have you kind of facilitated that?
We start by asking everyone in the company. Well, with our consulting work, we start by asking everyone in the company at least a broad set of people across the company, what diversity means to them, what inclusion means to them, and start to develop a company-wide definition of diversity and inclusion. And then literally we talk to people across the company about the ideas that they have, the experiences that they've had, and really develop a strategy that includes all of those voices. I think you have to do that. So that's what we do at the kind of company-wide level, and including the executives all across the executive teams and the board as well. For an individual wanting to create individual change, who may not be an executive in a company, I think that there's some different resources for understanding the language around diversity and inclusion, and there's some courses out there around allyship and some information around allyship that I think can be really beneficial to really there's so many different things that you can do. But
maybe before we dive into that, because I know we're going to talk about that in a future episode, maybe we can start by talking about why it's even hard for them to take action individually.
We have been contacted by a lot of individuals saying that they care about diversity and inclusion and they want to implement change in their company. They need help, right? And often we go back and we have a one-on-one call or face-to-face, and we say, what does this conversation align with the company's values? What have been done? Have they discovered what has been done in the past? And then question, if they don't feel confident to have a conversation with a manager or someone, a colleague or someone in an executive role around diversity and inclusion, they need to check, see if it's a place they want to work. Because it can be a difficult conversation. An article just came out today where an individual He quit a well-known company because his manager and executive said that stop talking about diversity and inclusion.
Yeah.
Right? And so like this topic is sensitive to a lot of people. They're afraid of it. They don't want to talk about it. It creates a sense of fear.
Yeah.
And anger and frustration for others.
Right.
So when people come to us, it's like, well, I want to talk about it. A suggestion is approach it with a business case.
Yeah.
That's one. Approach it with an empathy case.
Yep.
Approach it with a idea versus, hey, I want to work in diversity and inclusion at my company.
Right.
Because that's how we get asked. And it's like diversity and inclusion is such a big umbrella word. So for your organization,
And
loaded, right? With a lot of emotions, with a lot of history.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are an individual, say you work in product, and you want to work on diversity and inclusion at your SaaS company, right? So a suggestion would be identify that you want to talk to your manager, like, I want to reach this audience that we haven't been talking with or connected with this lens. How can we make that happen?
Yeah.
Right? That's on the cost of the product. But from a culture perspective, it could be, have we measured? Or I noticed that I'm the only female, African American, Latino, LGBT. There's some issues to me that are not being brought up, or how can we have a dialogue about it?
Yeah, I mean, your question was what keeps people from taking action, I think, really. And the number one thing is fear.
Yeah. Losing their jobs.
Losing your jobs, but also just fear of making a mistake. It can be hard to navigate. There are definitely people who are good at shaming, publicly shaming, and that just doesn't make it easier to create change and to take action. So I think the inherent in what Wayne is saying is just take the first step. Take one step. Try something new. Talk to someone. Understand, basic things. Understand what their experience is. Listen. Those can be really powerful first steps.
Yeah.
It seems like the tech industry has forgotten that we are humans.
Yeah.
We had a conversation as a team talking about
Human first,
right? And just because I'm different, just because I'm a black male, right, from the South, doesn't mean I can't have an intellectual conversation around topics that are passionate to me. Whereas that could be black men, that could be STEM products, that could be just how can we look at different demographics or location. Why can't we have a real conversation? If we can talk about growth, we can talk about APIs, we can talk about growth hacking, design thinking, why can't we talk about working together as humans and expanding the mindset and opportunity and behaviors for all humans?
Yeah.
What's the problem?
Yeah. So maybe you can touch upon that. What's some of the resistance around the conversations?
It goes back to what Melinda said. It's fear. It's fear, but it's also fear because the tech industry is traditionally has been a type A God-like mentality where everybody has all the answers, and so if you go to someone and say, we're talking about diversity and inclusion, you don't have the answers, it can create a sense of fear. Or the tech industry, we know the data, right? It's in Silicon Valley, it's in San Francisco, it's in the East Bay, and the data just in terms of population has not, is in terms of African American, in San Francisco it's like 6%. And then we know the numbers after Google, so the tech roles is average 2% with the entire organization. So the culture of these companies traditionally has been diverse. So now you want to take an individual who may be the one and only diverse individual, or African American, Latino women, or Latin Latino on the team, and want to talk about a culture topic that's relative to them, to someone who doesn't have the same experiences. There could be a sense of like fear and don't have all the answers and not understanding the why. And that right there creates tension.
Right.
There's also, there are studies that show that if a company is talking about diversity, people within the company think that it's changing. And so that is another aspect of this, is that and that's just the psychology of all of this, is that when you start talking about diversity, people think that it's changing.
Changing for the better, or changing
changing
unknown?
for the better.
Okay.
Better.
Okay.
Yeah, people think if you're talking about it, it's changing.
Yeah.
For the positive.
Yeah.
And then there's also on the fear side, though, there's also a fear that if other people rise up, you'll fall down.
Yeah, it's a zero-sum game.
Exactly. But it's not. I mean, this tech industry is growing rapidly. There aren't enough people to fill all the tech jobs. That's absolutely not the case. Yeah. So we just need to change that perception.
So in the next episode, we're going to talk about best practices. But before we wrap up this one, I want to just address some of the objections that our audience may come across when trying to broach the topic, right? They might have somebody say, oh, we're not going to talk about it at all. It's not a priority, like ship product, or, hey, we had a lovely little meetup the other day with some great female engineers. Like, what's the problem? We're making incremental progress. Or, hey, we've got to move really fast, and whatever you do, like, how do I know it's going to be a 10x impact, right? And that can be overwhelming for the person on the receiving end. So how do we deal with some of those objections?
Yeah.
I think, one of the things that people in tech react to really well to is data, right? So the first thing is measure and find out that information, find out the demographics of the company, find out if you can, find out the engagement metrics as well, because you can start to look at engagement metrics as it relates to race and gender and ethnicity, and people with disabilities, and you can really see something is not right. And once you look at the data, then you can say, well, wait, we have a really high turnover rate among women. That's a big
everybody's making babies
problem. There's lots of data that shows that is a small and important part of of society, but that is only one. Most of the women who leave tech, just so we're absolutely clear, most of the women that leave tech go to other industries and become leaders in those industries. So
we're missing out on opportunities.
The cost of turnover is high in a company. You don't want to lose people. That's a huge cost.
Right. So that's just employment. What about with the product itself? Because you had been touching upon some of that.
Yeah, I would say that for individuals who want to create change, or they experience some, they're in a culture they want to make improvements in. It is start with the data, like Mona articulated, but it's also start documenting examples, right? Like we work with one company where the CEO have heard some stories, but it was coming second, third hand.
Yeah, that's a challenge.
And so if you're an individual, you want to work, you work on your product team, your energy team, or you could be a product manager. And you constantly see these examples, these situations happen. Take note that this happened on this day. This was the experience, and therefore you're able to be able to have proof and saying that this may not be it. The opportunity to create change may come under the window of umbrella of diversity and inclusion, but it could be just how can we conduct an inclusive meeting, just a better meeting? How can we make sure all the voices are heard? If you got a product team and it's like 7 guys, 3 women, and the women hardly ever speak up or talk, you have a communication and culture problem where the women either don't feel empowered or the men are being assholes or both, right? Right? And so it's like that is just it's culture. So the change you want to make may not say, I want to create a diversity inclusion strategy, or I want to increase the number one my product team, or I want to make sure the voice is heard. Or it may just be saying, hey, I want to talk about how we can conduct a better meeting that benefits the company and everyone.
So start small, and that makes a big difference compounded over time.
But track it, because you got to have real examples that's relative to the change you want to make.
Did you want to
it affects product design in a huge way, and I don't think we talk about it enough, that if you want to grow your customer base, and if that customer base is diverse, your designers and developers need to reflect that customer base. If you're designing for the wrong customer base, you're not going to have a success. And it has huge implications. I mean, some really terrible ones out there. Like even when the airbags were designed, for example, they were designed by men. And in the first rollout, several women died, children died because they didn't test them out on women and children. Yeah. That's just a really basic example. Then we see that in the tech industry a lot now, where especially when AI is being developed and things come out on Google search where Black people are mislabeled. Like that is a really dreadful outcome of not having diverse people designing your programs.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I'll probably say that another problem or opportunity is that when people are talking about diversity and inclusion, they have to remember that if you want to focus on inclusion, look at it from a spectrum of everyone, right? And thinking about diversity is beyond just the color of someone's skin. We was talking earlier about people with hidden invisible disabilities.
Yeah.
Think about accessibility. I think about age. I think about class. Got people with different heritage. And veterans. It's not just black and white.
Yeah.
It's not just gender. It's literally everyone. But the solution that may pertain to a company can be one thing. And it's okay if you're going to focus on, we're going to focus on STEM, youth, kids, pipeline. That's okay.
Right.
But identify and communicate that this is what we're doing and as part of a solution, but not the solution. Or we're going to focus on college students. That's okay. It's good. You need to do that.
Yeah.
But identify and be clear and authentic about where your solution is around college students affects your business and your culture. And understand that if you're a person in that culture, say my company says, we got a diversity inclusion plan, we focus on college students, yay, great. But then if you understand that most of your employees want to focus on a different demographic, want to do something around veterans, then as a team, as a company, depending on what size, you got to understand there's an opportunity and a need to focus on this area as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for joining us today. And now for all of you out there in the audience, let us know in the comments below this video if your organization has put in place any diversity and inclusion initiatives and what's been the impact. And be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to receive the next episode where we'll dive a little bit deeper and share some of the best practices if you're thinking about putting in place a diversity and inclusion initiative at your organization or want to join another one. Ciao for now. This episode of Build is brought to you by our sponsor, Pivotal Tracker.